on the Big 550 KTRS.
Ann Compton is nice enough to take a couple minutes out of her busy morning to check in with us. She is in Washington, D.C. Good morning, Ann Compton.
And good morning to you. A couple of big stories developing here today. You know, for the last couple of years, President Obama has been criticized for kind of ignoring the Middle East, or at least the talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which have been becalmed, even though there are those winds of Arab Spring blowing through much of the Arab world. Well, Secretary of State Kerry made it his job number one to go back to the Middle East repeatedly over the last couple of months, and he actually has the Israelis and Palestinians sending top negotiators here to Washington for an opening dinner tonight. These are peace talks on how to have peace talks. It's not necessarily the issues on the table, but how to get there. But it's an important moment.
John Kerry is dealing with peace talks in Israel and also dealing with his wife. His wife is out of the hospital now?
I believe she is. She had gone to a rehabilitation hospital to get back, and I think last I heard she was back home at their home in Boston and expected to be back to her normal schedule sometime soon. Secretary Kerry actually left her bedside to go back to to Israel for yet another round of kind of private talks. And one of the things that has brought this meeting tonight together is that yesterday the Israeli cabinet agreed to something that Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed was a tough decision. They voted split decision to release 104 Palestinian prisoners who are in Israeli jails for violence against Israel, and those 104 will be released gradually as peace talks continue. It was a sign of good faith by the Israelis, and of course, what's left on the table for them once they do actually start negotiations are the hardest issues of all. Who will control the city of Jerusalem? What happens to Palestinian refugees who are scattered across the Middle East? And of course, what would the borders of a new Palestinian state look like?
Interesting. Let's move on to some other news. How has President Obama's push last week, how has that been received, and anything new on the economic front from the
President Obama's back on the road tomorrow, Tuesday, to Chattanooga, Tennessee. He will go to an Amazon.com shipping warehouse to talk about manufacturing, American manufacturers, and how their productivity will help reignite the U.S. economy. You know, there's still that deep divide, McGraw, between the president and the Republicans on Capitol Hill. The president makes the case at every stop that the federal government needs to spend money to help private industry get going again. Those here in Washington, on the Republican side at least, argue the government has to spend less money to get the economy reignited.
He's certainly talking over Washington and going to the people by having these stops, including one here in Missouri last week.
He is indeed. And I got to tell you, the most intriguing item on the president's schedule comes at 12 noon Eastern time today. Into the White House West Wing, a private dining room just off the Oval Office, President Obama will dine alone with Hillary Clinton. Not only did she live here for 8 years and she was his Secretary of State for 4, but she was his bitter political rival in the 2008 campaign. She thought she had the nomination, and of course she lost it to Barack Obama. So they're coming in for a private lunch. I don't know whether he will give her any advice on whether she ought to run for president in 2016. But can you imagine Joe Biden, the vice president, kind of kneeling down by the keyhole, trying to listen in? He, too, has been interested in 2016.
Do we know who called this meeting? Is this President Obama, or did she say, hey,
when you're invited to the White House, to the private dining room, it is always the president's invitation.
All right, fair enough. And lastly, Ann Compton, before we let you go, passing of a legend last week, Helen Thomas passed away.
Helen Thomas, on the eve of her 93rd birthday, died. She retired really from active reporting 13 years ago. And she resigned from United Press International. For the last 12 years, she's been a columnist. But her impact here. She was always, even in her 80s, McGraw, she was the first one in the press room door every morning, the last one out at night, and she never lost that zest for asking tough questions. She became a columnist, an opinion columnist in her later years, but the impact that she had for more than 40 years as a reporter here will really live on. We kept that front row seat open for her for a long, long time.
She also was the first female, right, in that room. She broke the glass ceiling, if you will.
Let me put it this way. She was the first female reporter in the White House press corps who insisted on covering the president, not ladies and teas and parties. She was relentlessly covering the Oval Office and the serious issues. And because she worked for a wire service, the news associations that have great reporters out there, and their stories don't have their own newspaper or television station. Their stories go to the rest of us, the Associated Press and UPI and Reuters, our wire services. And because of her position with that important kind of nexus of reporting and distribution, she became the dean of the White House press corps for a long, long time. And she was incredibly generous to young women reporters coming along, including me.
That's Ann Compton live in Washington, D.C. Ann Compton, thanks for checking in. Have a good day.
Thanks so much.
You got it. 7:58 here on the Big 550 KTRS. Great insight from Ann Compton, who herself is a legend and a pioneer of certain ways. So Ann Compton, love to have her on the show. Great insight. 7:58 here on the Big 550 KTRS.